Welcome EDP students, this is m.felicetti and I will be taking you through the building of your final robotics project, the Sumobot. So first thing we're going to do is just make sure that we have all of our parts. The first being our PCB. This will be either blue or white. Next we'll need some resistors. So this includes 3 100k ohm resistors, 3 100 ohm resistors, one 10k ohm resistor, and also 3 330 ohm resistors. Next we'll need 3 coloured LEDs, and then we'll need 3 infrared transmitters, and also 3 infrared receivers. Next we'll need 3 brass standoffs, and we'll also need 2 nylon standoffs. And for these we'll need 6 M3 screws. Next we'll need a push button like we've been using in the lab, and this is a 2-pin version. We'll also need our ultrasonic sensor, and that has 4 connectors on the back. We'll need a set of female headers and also a set of male headers. We'll need a set of 4 wheels for our robot, and these will be different colours depending on what you get, and we'll need 2 O-rings for the tyres for our wheels. We'll need some cable ties, 2 of those, and we'll need some continuous rotation servo motors, so 2 of those also, including all their little parts. We'll need a battery pack, and we'll need some double-sided tape, and we'll also need our Arduino Nano that we've been using so far. Alright, so now we're going to have a look at our board. So we'll see some text, and this is part of our silk screen, and we'll see the Latrobe logo and some other text around it. Now all the text that's in this orientation are all from left to right, and if we rotate our board, we'll note that all the text on, once we've rotated it, is also in one direction. We flip the board over and we'll note we've got the same thing on the other side. So why is this important? Well, we need to orient our components that have markings such that they can be read from left to right. Also, this includes our resistors, and so we need to align our resistors such that their bands line up correctly so that they can be read easily. Now the first components that we're going to add to our board are our 330 ohm resistors, and these are our orange, black, brown resistors on our 5-banded resistors. And so what we're going to do is take the paper off if there's paper, and where we're going to place them is in R2, R3 and R4. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get our pliers and just bend the legs over neatly, okay, without making a mess of them. And then we're going to place them in the holes, and we can see the silk screen that tells us where the resistor is going to go. Now you'll note that the way that I've put this in, I've put it in so it can be read from left to right, corresponding with the other text on the board. We have orange, black, brown. We'll make sure that it is right up against the edge, and then we'll splay the legs slightly at about a 45-degree angle on the other side so that the LED doesn't fall out before we solder it. We'll do the same with the other 2 resistors. Alright, so now we've done that, we can now begin soldering. So first things first, we need to make sure that we've got our safety glasses on, and we need to make sure our soldering iron is on and the tip is clean. We're also going to add just a little bit of solder to the top of the tip, just to wet it so that it's nice and shiny and makes a good connection to our board. We're then going to start soldering each of the legs to the board, making sure that we're keeping the soldering iron nice and still. We leave the soldering iron on long enough after we've applied the solder such that it can soak through, and we don't put too much solder on. It's always better to put a little bit of solder and then having to come back and add a little bit more, rather than adding huge blobs of solder and trying to remove them later and possibly ending up with shorts. So we'll keep going and add the last little bit. Okay, so once we've done the soldering, make sure you check and make sure that you've got a nice little volcano shape. You haven't got a big blob on there, and if you do, you need to remove it. Now, we've still got our legs on there, so we need to remove these with the cutters. And what we're going to do is hold the leads with our fingers such that they don't fly up in the air when we're cutting them. So we'll cut them nice and close, and then we'll cut the other side. Once again, making sure that we're holding them so they don't fling up in the air. The next thing we're going to do is add our 100 kilo ohm resistors. And these are going to go into R8, R9, and R10 up the top here. And we're basically going to do the exact same thing we did before, which is folding the legs, then splaying them out, and then we'll solder. So now we've done that, we should have a nice solder joint, and we can cut the leads off once again, making sure that we are safe about it by holding our leads. So now we should have 6 resistors on the board, and they should be nice and flat up against the board. Okay, so they shouldn't be up high. We're now going to add R5, R6, and R7. And these are our 100 ohm resistors. So we're going to add these to our board in the exact same way as before. Now we've done this, we can now add our final resistor to our board, which is going to be our R1. And this is going to be our 10 kilo ohm resistor, which is the only resistor left. Once again, we're going to bend our legs, we will put it in the holes, splay, and then solder it to the board. Okay, and now we'll just cut the leads off this final resistor, and now we've got all of our resistors on the board, and so it should look nice like this. Alright, so now we're going to add our IR LEDs, and these are on the other side of the board, and these are going to go into D4, D5, and D6. Now, these are the clear ones, and what we'll notice on the board on the silk screen is that there is a flat edge on the silk screen for these LEDs, and then there's a round part for each one of these as well. Now, if we have a look at the LEDs, we'll find that one side has a flat edge to it, and it may be hard to see in the video, but you'll definitely find this yourself, and this needs to match up with the board. So make sure that these are the correct orientation, and once you are happy with the orientation, push it in all the way through, and we'll do the same with the other two. Okay, double checking our orientation. So once we've got these through, we're going to hold them with our fingers, and then we're going to splay them out so that they don't fall through, but we're not going to start soldering straight away. So now we're going to flip the board back over. And we don't want the LEDs to be flat on the board like this. We want them offset just a little bit, a couple of millimeters. And so what we're going to do is use our thumb and just push them over at a slight angle so that they will be offset from the board by a little bit. Now we will straighten these up later, but what we're trying to do is get all the LEDs with a similar or pretty much the same angle so that they'll all be off the board by the same height. So just double check that they are all aligned, and then what we're going to do is flip the board over, and we're only going to solder one pin of each of our LEDs. Alright, so now that we've soldered these, we're going to flip the board over and double check that they haven't moved, which in this case they haven't, but if they did, we can use our soldering iron to heat up one of the pins, the pin that we applied solder to, and by doing so it'll allow the LED to move around while the solder is still liquid, and we can use our fingers just to reposition the LED into the correct position. But because we're happy here, we can go back and solder the other lead. And then again, we're just going to cut those leads off. Once again, being safe by holding the leads with our hands so that they don't fly up in the air. So now that we've done that, we'll leave these as they are, and we'll add in our infrared receivers. So these are our black ones, and these also have a flat edge, and so we need to match these up. And these are going into D6, D7, D8, and D9. Okay, and we're going to follow the exact same process as we did before, where we first put them all the way down, splay the legs, and then push them over a little bit. So we'll get that going. Now once we've got these bent over, because of the other LEDs being there, it may be hard to sit it on the board without them falling back in. So they might be slightly wobbling around. And so try and position the best you can, and then use something else. So here I'm using the tape. You might have something that's about the same height, just to hold the LEDs so that the board isn't rolling around. And then we'll just go and do our soldering. Once again, only soldering one of the leads. We'll then flip the board over, and we'll notice that one of the LEDs has fallen in. So we need to fix that one up because it's not aligned with the other ones. So what we're going to do is get our soldering iron and heat up this one joint that we soldered, okay, with our soldering iron, and with our finger we're just going to move that around, and now it should be in the right place. Okay, and so they're all aligned now. We might just fix this middle one up a little bit as well, just to get it perfect. So once you're happy, then you can go back and solder the other lead. Now, all of our infrared LEDs are added to the board. So next we just need to straighten these up, and we can just use our fingers and thumb just to get them nice and straight so that they're pointing straight up. Okay. If we look on the side of the board, we should be able to see them all line up perfectly. If not, just keep pushing them until they do line up. Alright, and now once we're happy with that, we're now going to add our coloured LEDs to our board. Now, because we've got the LEDs on one side of the board, grab something to level out your board because it will rock around otherwise. Now we're going to add these LEDs to D1, D2 and D3. Once again, making sure that they're in the correct orientation so the flat sides match up. And we'll do basically the same thing as we did before. So we're adding our LEDs in, we'll splay the legs, we'll bend them over, we'll solder one pin, then we'll try and align them if they've gone out of alignment, and then we'll solder the other pin and then straighten them up. And now that's done, we now have all of our LEDs on our board. Alright, now that we've done that, we now are going to grab our female headers, and we're not going to worry about this board right now. We're going to grab our Arduino Nano board, and what we're going to do with this is we're going to get our female headers and connect this to one side of our Nano board, such that there's a flat edge on one end, and then we're going to grab our cutters, and what we're going to do is cut next to the last pin that's connected, and we're actually going to cut right through that connector. So we'll cut into that, and what we'll notice is one of the pins fall out, and that's what we want, so that's okay. And then we'll use our cutters just to clean up the edge. Okay, so that it's nice and straight. Okay, so that's nice and clean. And then we'll grab our female headers again, the leftovers, and we'll do the exact same thing on the other side. Okay, so aligned, we cut through one of the connectors, and then we just use our our cutters to clean that edge up. Okay, so now we should have our headers connected to another set of connectors, and then we're going to put this on the board. So you'll see that there's these rows of pads here, and this is where our Arduino is going to sit. And so we'll just plug this in with the Nano still connected, and then we'll flip the board over, making sure that it's nice and flat on the board, and then we need to solder every one of these pins, making sure that we don't cause a short and that we've got nice clean solder joints. Alright, so now we've got all of those pins soldered, we can now take our Nano off the board, and if we want to, when we want to put it back in, it will fit perfectly in there. So now we've got to add another set of female headers, and we only need 4 this time. So we're going to get our cutters and cut 4 connectors. Now we once again cut through one of the pins, but on the other side we can just clean it up from where we cut before. So just clean that up, make it nice and neat using our cutters, and then on the 5th pin across we'll just cut straight through that. Okay, and the pin will come out, and then we'll just clean it up with the cutters. Now, once that's all cleaned up, we're going to place this at the front of our board in P8. Okay, so that's right here. Okay, so we place that in. Now it may wobble around a bit and it may be a bit difficult to align, So you may want to get your something to sit it so that it stays straight, but just be careful that it doesn't rock around too much. Now, only solder one of the pins to start off with, because you may find that the header has fallen down, which in this case it has. And so what we're going to do is just push on our thumb, and we're going to heat up that one pin again and just push it until it's straight. And then that solder will hold it in place, and we can go back and solder the other 3 pins. So now that that's all done, we are now going to add our male headers, which are these here. Now, these are going to go on this side of the board, okay, and we'll actually need quite a few of these. So we'll take our male headers, and we'll need our cutters, and we'll need 4 sets of 3s. So we'll cut them into 3s, so we'll need 4 of these. Okay, and this time you just cut in between them, so we don't lose a pin with these types of headers. So we've got 4 of those, and then we'll need a set of 4. So we'll cut 4 out, and lastly we'll need a set of 6. Okay, and these are all the male headers that we'll need. Alright, so our 3s are going to go into P1, P2, P6 and P7. And we'll start with 6 and 7 because they'll stop the board from rocking around. Now, when you turn these over, you're going to have to try and hold them in so they don't fall out. Okay, because they will. So just try and hold them with your hand until you get close to the table, and then let go at the last minute, and try and hold them there. Now with these, once again, only solder 1 pin to start off with, just in case they become misaligned and they're not flat up against the board. So once we've done that, we can then flip over the board and see if they're straight, which in this case they're not. And so we can use the soldering iron to heat up the pin that we soldered and then move around the other pins. Now when you do this, you need to be careful. Only touch the 2 pins that you're not heating up, because the whole pin will heat up and it will burn you. So don't touch the pin that you're heating up. Okay, touch the other pins to move it around. Alright, so once they're nice and straight, okay, so you'll notice that I'm not touching the other pins. Okay, I'm just touching the back 2, but the front one is the one that I'm heating up, and I'll get them nice and straight. So once it's nice and straight, then I can go back and solder the rest. Okay, so now we can add in P1 and P2, exactly the same as we did for P6 and 7. And now that we've done that, we can now add our 4-way, and that's going to go into P3 right in the middle of the board, and we'll solder that in like we did with the other ones. And now we've got our last one, which is P4, which goes down the bottom here. Okay, so we want these nice and flat against the bottom of our PCB. So make sure that you are soldering one pin to start with, okay, not the whole lot, because as you'll see here, it's slightly fallen out, and so we'll heat the pin up and we'll push the other pins down with our fingers so that we get it nice and flat against this board. Okay, so once we heat it up, you'll see that it drops and now it's nice and flat. And then we can go back and solder the rest. And now we've done this, we're nearly done with our soldering. We've only got a couple of things left. Alright, so now one of the things left is our switch. Now you'll notice that it's a 4-pin switch, but we have a 2-pin switch. And so what we're going to do is we're going to connect the switch on the outer 2 pads, not the inner 2, because it won't work. So we're going to put that in, and we'll notice that it's quite a lot lower than the other components. So you may want to get one of your wheels or something else and put it under it when you're soldering, so that it's still being pushed up against the board, so it's nice and flat. Also, you'll notice that the pads for the switch need a lot more solder, just because they're a lot larger. Okay, make sure that it is up against the board, so make sure always to check before you do the second pin, because we can still fix it when there's only one soldered. Okay, and then once you've done that, we can then go and cut the excess lead off. Now we have our switch. Now the very last thing for us to solder on is the connectors from our battery pack. So we first are actually going to pass our wires through a couple of holes to provide strain relief so that we don't rip the leads out of our board. And so how we're going to do this is we're going to flip the board onto this side. Okay, so this is the side that says left motor and right motor, and we'll notice that there's 2 holes at the bottom next to P1. So we're going to grab both of our wires, these black and red wires, and we're going to pass it through the first hole. Okay, so that's the ones closest to left motor. Okay, so pass them through, give it a little bit of wire, then we're going to turn the board over, and then we're going to pass them through the other hole that's next to it. So push them right through, and then we're going to flip the board over once again, and then you'll notice that next to them we've got PWR, standing for power, and we need to connect our black and red wires to this. So you'll notice underneath the pads there's a plus and a minus. The red one needs to be connected to the plus, and the black one needs to be connected to the minus. And we're going to solder these on. So get them positioned first. You may need to reposition these a little bit. These are probably the most difficult thing on this board to solder because they'll typically try and pop out while you're soldering them. So with the excess lead, just try and use that to push them nice and flat against the board. We don't want these to be too far out because we don't want to short ground and VCC. So try and get it nice and flat up against the board and then solder. So we'll get that soldered, we'll flip it over and just make sure that it is actually nice and flat against the board. Okay, so it's nice and flat against the board. There's no wire showing on the other side. So now we'll tackle the ground wire, which is the black one. So we want to make sure that that's nice and flat. So keep trying to position it until it is nice and flat up against the board. Okay. Now when soldering these, keep in mind that the wires will heat up, and so you can destroy the wire's cover if you apply too much heat, so just be careful. Alright, so just heating it up a little bit more and just pushing that wire up really nice and close to the board so that it can't touch any other components. Okay, so once you're happy with that, you can then start pulling your wires back through. Okay, so just pull them through. They don't have to be pulled tight. Okay, you don't want them pulled extremely tight, just so that they're not going to catch on anything. Okay, so they're going to be a little bit loose towards the board side. So now all of our soldering's done, we are now going to add our standoffs. So these are our brass standoffs. So we'll need 3 M3 screws and our 3 brass standoffs, and these are going to connect in these 3 big holes. Okay, so you got 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to get our standoff, and it needs to sit up this way. Okay, so not on the other side of the board, but up that way. So get your screw and put it through the hole, and just with using your thumb hold it in place, and then just tighten the header onto the screw. So repeat that for the other 2. And then once you've done that, get your screwdriver and just tighten them a little bit so that they're nice and straight and strongly on the board. Okay, now we can add our nylon headers, and these go at the front of the board on the outer holes. Okay, and they just pop in. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add our servo motors. Now we won't need the little parts that came with them yet, and before you do this, make sure that you have centered them in the lab. So we're going to put our motors where it says left motor and right motor, and we'll need some double-sided tape to put in these locations. Now with this, we don't want to cover these holes, so we need to cut it so that it's nice and short, such that it doesn't cover the holes, but it will be enough to stick the motor down. So we'll cut those. Now when you do this, make sure that you don't touch the tape. Try and keep your fingers away so that it stays nice and sticky. And then just push it down and we'll do the other. Now I've left the other side on, we'll take that off at the last minute. Alright, so we've got both of those down. And now we're going to just push them down nice and hard using our fingers. And then we're going to start trying to take the tape off. Now you might find that it's very difficult to get the edge, and it's very difficult to actually lift it up without lifting the bottom. So if you can't get it with your fingers, you might find that the tweezers might help. It's still a little bit difficult, but once you get a little bit up, you'll finally get it. Okay. Alright, and now we've got the tape off, we're now going to add our servo motor. Now we need to put this in the correct direction, so the connector needs to go at the back of the board. Okay, so the wires should come out the back. Alright, so make sure that it is in this orientation, okay, because it won't fit otherwise with where we want our wheels. Okay, so we want our wheels right at the back of the board. Okay, try and line it up so it matches the silk screen as best you can, and then just push it down nice and hard. Okay, so that's one is nicely aligned. And now we can go about doing the other one. So we'll do this in the same way. We'll take the double-sided tape off again using our pliers, and then we'll stick our servo motor down. So now we've got that done, we're going to grab our cable ties, and we're going to thread our cable ties from the bottom of the board through the holes next to the servo. So we'll start with this hole and pass the cable through, okay, making sure that we're passing from the bottom and that we've got the rib side on the inside. We then pass it back through over the servo motor, and this is going to pull it down nice and tightly. Okay, so turn it around, and then we're going to pull this through really nice and tight, and then we're going to push it through the other side of the cable tie. Alright, and then we pull this nice and tight, very tight, as tight as we can. Okay, we want this to hold down the servo really strong, and this will make a difference when you have the wheels on and are starting to move around. You don't want this servo motor moving around. So you might find getting some pliers and tightening it even more might help. Just be careful not to tear it. Okay. Once you're happy, just test that it's not moving around too much. It's got the tape and the cable tie now to hold it nice and flat. And then just cut the rest off. Once we've done that, we can then repeat and do it with the other one. Okay, so in the exact same way, we pass it through the bottom, over the top, back through, and then pushing that through, and then making it nice and tight. Okay, grab the pliers and tighten it a little bit more. And then cutting the excess off. So they should be nice and tight now. Alright, now that we've got that done, we're now going to have to wrap our wires from our servos around the brass headers. Now, depending on the servos, your wires might be slightly longer or shorter, but with these ones here, I'm going to bring it around the back of the brass header and then just wrap it around two of the brass headers, the ones closest to the servo, until I run out of wire to wrap around. And then I'm going to put this connector and connect it to the pins just above the servo motor. Now what's important here is that you'll notice on the pins there's a plus, a minus and an S. Now the minus needs to connect to the brown wire and the S needs to connect to the yellow or orange wire. This needs to be in the correct orientation, so be careful and make sure that it is correct. And we'll push that down and get that connected. And then we're just going to do the exact same thing with the other side, so wrap it around the standoffs and then we'll connect it, making sure that we connect it in the right orientation, so that S should match with the orange or yellow wire. Okay, and now we've got those all in. Okay, and they shouldn't be flapping around or moving around. They should be nice and tight. Then we're going to get our Arduino Nano, and we'll notice at the bottom of the board it says USB. This is the side that we need the USB port to be on, and we'll just plug that in. Okay. Then once we've done that, we'll grab our battery pack and take the back off, and we'll place the bottom part onto the board, aligning the holes to our standoffs. And we'll get the remaining 3 M3 screws and we'll push those through. And then we will align this with our board and we'll get our screwdriver and screw each one of the screws in. Alright, now we've got that, everything is pretty much connected. We can add the top of our battery pack. You can add your batteries now if you like, just leave the battery pack off until you're ready to start. And just click that in, you'll hear a little bit of a click. Alright, so now that we've done all that, we now need to build our wheels. So we'll need to grab our 4 laser cut wheels, and we'll need all the little parts that came with the servo now. Now we won't need these parts here, okay? We just want the connector that has the cross in it, okay? So we can get rid of all 4 of these. Okay, so we want these 2 ones. And you'll notice that we've got 2 little screws and then we've got 4 larger ones. So right now all we want is the larger ones, and we're going to get our little nylon connector and we're just going to place that onto one of our wheels, and then we're going to turn that over, and you'll notice that there's an S on the left side and then there's a hole on the right side with the way I'm holding it. And then we're going to grab our screw and we're going to put it through the hole side, and we're going to screw this just a little bit, just enough to hold that connector. Alright, so just a little bit, not the full way through. So now it will stay still. And then we need to grab another laser cut wheel, and we need to match this up so that the hole matches the S on the other one and the S matches the hole on the other one. So we'll push those together, and then we're going to screw the screw through such that it goes into the S on the other side. So we'll screw that together. Now these can sometimes be a little bit difficult. You might need to take the screw out and then screw it back in, but see how you go. Then we grab the other screw and we flip the board over and we put the screw through the hole. Okay, so the sharp end of the screw should always go through the S, not the other way around, or else you may snap your wheel. Alright, so you'll notice here that it didn't go in correctly, so I'm undoing it and then just with a bit of force, just pushing it to the side a little bit so that it goes correctly through the hole. Okay, and once you've got it correct, it should be even all the way around. So I'm just squeezing that in a little bit more. Okay. Now it doesn't need to be super tight, but once you've got it, you can see that it is even all the way around. Okay, so the gap is the same throughout. And then we're just going to get our O-ring and chuck that over the top. Okay. And then we do the same with the other one. Alright, so now we've got both the wheels, we now need to attach these to our servos. Now, you'll notice that there's only one way to connect these. Okay, so we want the side with the ribs on the inside, such that it connects to the servo. Okay, not on the other side. So we'll place that on. Okay, make sure it's nice and tight on there. Alright, so it doesn't wobble. And then we're going to grab one of these little screws and we're going to put that in the middle. So we'll screw that down until it's nice and tight. And then we'll do the same with the other side. Alright, so now we just add the last screw. And once again, just make sure this is nice and tight. Alright, we're nearly done. So we should have everything sitting nicely. Double check. And now we're going to add our ultrasonic sensor, and this just goes into the female header at the front. And now we're nearly done, and it's looking really good. But what you'll notice is that the wheels and the standoffs are not making this aligned. So our ultrasonic's kind of pointing up a bit, and our board's on a very big angle. So what we want to do is even this up a little bit, and we're going to cut our standoffs until our ultrasonic sensor is pointing forward so that we can accurately detect what's in front of the robot. So this will be a bit of trial and error until you get it to the correct height that you think is appropriate, such that the board is pretty much parallel with the ground, and so is the ultrasonic sensor. So this concludes the robot building. This is your Sumobot, and good luck with your project. Thank you.